Hey guys, tonight we board a creaky wooden dhow just as the sun rises, its light casting honey-colored ripples over the Indian Ocean. The sails flap lazily like they're still deciding whether to bother catching wind. There's a smell of salt, sweat, and unmistakably goat. You stand there, barefoot on the uneven deck, watching a row of goats munch seaweed with the same smugness usually reserved for philosophers and cats. You're part of the crew now, apparently. Or at least, the goats have accepted your presence, which is half the battle. One steps forward, tail twitching, and there, tied to the tip of that tail, is a small bundle, bits of woven thread, a shell polished smooth by years of surf, and something that might be a dried fig or possibly a petrified toe. You're not sure if it's adorable or unsettling. Maybe both. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the time where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The dhow creaks beneath you like an old man shifting in bed. The captain hums to himself while checking the lines. He smells faintly of clove bark and mango, like someone who once owned a spice shop but gave it up to chase wind. A gull screams somewhere above, announcing its opinions without being asked. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Somali sailors have been navigating the Indian Ocean since at least the first millennium CE, traveling from Mogadishu to the Swahili coast, India, and even China. Their boats, the dhows, used lateen sails to catch the monsoon winds and relied on centuries of oral knowledge for navigation. These were sailors who didn't need compasses. They had stars, tides, and an uncanny ability to read a sky full of humidity. And they brought goats, always goats, not just for meat or milk. Though those were useful, the goats were symbolic, two walking talismans that connected ship and shore, people and spirits. The goats had roles. Here's your quirky tidbit. Certain Somali crews believed that tying small charms to the tails of their goats would bring good fortune on voyages. These charms varied shells for safe crossing, woven knots for steady trade winds, or dried herbs to keep away bad spirits. The goat didn't mind. The tail is apparently the most diplomatic part of any animal. Right now, you're watching a sailor thin, barefoot, with silver in his beard and a laugh like cracked glass tie, a red thread around a young goat's tail. He mutters something under his breath. Not a prayer. Not exactly. It's more like a rhythm, something he learned from his grandfather who learned it from the waves. You try it too. Carefully, you knot a bit of blue thread to the tail of a small black goat named, according to the whispering boy nearby, Axmed V. He blinks at you. You're not sure if it's approval or judgment. The charm swings gently. The boat tilts. The air shifts. The goats are now lying down in their wooden pens, tails twitching softly like little wind chimes of fate. Historians still argue whether these charms were true magical protections, folk art traditions, or practical tracking devices to tell whose goat belonged to whom. Maybe all three, or maybe none. History's funny like that. It floats, drifts, bobs, and occasionally sinks like a rock tied to a fig leaf. But what's certain is this. On this sleepy little dhow, slicing gently across the sea like a butter knife through honey, the goats are passengers of purpose. Their tails swing with stories. Their hooves tap out rhythms older than ink. And their presence somehow makes the boat feel less like a boat and more like a floating village trying its best. A warm breeze brushes your cheek. Someone hums a tune about a goat that once outran a storm. The sun rises a little higher, and you, still barefoot, still bewildered, settle into the sway of the sea. You spend the morning dodging goat droppings and trying not to trip over a coiled rope that seems to move only when you're not looking. The dhow sways rhythmically back, forth, side tilt, soft lurch as though it's humming a lullaby just for itself. And all the while, those goats lie there, tails twitching beneath their dangling charms like it's fashion week for livestock. The ocean breeze brings a strange peace. It smells of brine and wet wood, spiked occasionally with the sharp musk of goat fur drying under the sun. You sit near the prow, watching one particular goat, the senior matriarch of the herd, clearly whose tail bears not one but three charms: a curved seashell, a blue bead, and a strip of knotted red string. You ask a sailor what it means. Luck. Wind. And she doesn't take nonsense. he says, nodding solemnly. We call her Seagull. After the first light of dawn, you can't help but admire her. She's sprawled regally on a folded mat, chewing something she definitely wasn't given. Watching the horizon with narrowed eyes, she looks like she's seen storms and outlived them. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Goats weren't merely cargo on Somali dhows. They served multiple purposes: milk, meat, and even companionship. Some accounts describe how sailors would feed the goats with scraps of dried bread dipped in seawater, believing it would acclimate them to the ocean's mood. These goats were part of the social rhythm aboard, groomed, spoken to, and sometimes, weirdly, sung to. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some sailors claimed the goats could whisper if they sensed danger, not in a Nanny McPhee kind of way, but through behavior pawing the deck, snorting in the wrong direction, refusing to eat. One sailor even swore his goat screamed just before they hit a sandbar, though others recall it more as a startled bleat followed by dramatic silence. The charms on the goats' tails jingle as the boat rocks. They're small, but purposeful. You learn that the charms aren't random. Each sailor selects items meaningful to them: grandmother's threads, fish bones, palm seeds, a bead once blessed by a traveling cleric. One charm swings close to your hand, a shard of something translucent and greenish. Sea glass. The boy next to you explains, from a bottle that broke during a wedding storm. A what now? He nods sagely. They say it rained sideways. The bride's veil blew away, and the goat gave birth mid-ceremony. A very lucky day. Naturally, historians still argue whether these stories were meant as real beliefs or just entertaining folklore, passed down between generations of bored seafarers. Some even suggest the charms were initially meant as identifiers, only taking on magical significance later. But that doesn't change how the sailors treat them with quiet reverence, like they're carrying a little piece of home wherever the waves might pull them. You walk along the length of the dhow, careful not to startle the goats or step in anything warm. You notice sailors adjusting the goat's charms gently, checking knots, wiping off sea spray with surprising tenderness. They whisper things too softly for you to hear. It feels like a ritual, both casual and sacred, one where the line between the practical and the spiritual has blurred so thoroughly that no one bothers to separate them anymore. As the sun climbs higher, the goats doze, their tails still twitch, but now with sleep rather than suspicion. A warm stillness settles over the deck. Someone starts humming. It's the same tune from earlier, soft and repetitive. 4 notes looping over and over like the sea itself. The goats shift, ears flicking. A few even make little throaty noises, as if trying to join in. The dhow sails on. Trailing charm whispers in its wake, and you, still unsure of your place aboard, begin to feel a strange comfort in the rhythm of it all. A charm dangles from the goat nearest you, swaying side to side in time with the waves. It seems to wink each time the sun hits just right. You close your eyes for a moment and feel the deck breathing beneath you. Somewhere between the sun hitting its smidgest peak and the goats beginning their afternoon nap snort cycle, you finally ask the obvious question. Why goats? You say, gesturing to the sleeping herd. A sailor with sun-darkened skin and a beard threaded with sand chuckles from where he lounges, shelling roasted chickpeas into his mouth with precision. Why not? He replies first, because of course he does. Then he waves a hand in a half circle toward the bleeding bodies sprawled like they own the boat. They're loyal, eat anything, and they don't mind the sea. What more do you need? Here's your mainstream historical fact. Goats have been integral to Somali coastal life for centuries, prized for their adaptability, hardiness, and usefulness on land and sea. When Somali traders took to the ocean linking East Africa with Arabia, India, and even parts of Southeast Asia, they brought goats with them not just as cargo, but as part of their traveling toolkit, a living resource. Milk, meat, hide, warmth, and unexpectedly a weather warning system with hooves. Now, here's your quirky tidbit. Some records, mostly oral, describe goats as having been trained or at least strongly encouraged to remain calm on ships. A few even supposedly learned to respond to commands like stay, move, or stop chewing that rope. There's a particularly persistent legend about a goat named Noor, who learned to recognize 3 specific ports by smell alone, and would bleat precisely once when the ship approached each. The goats aboard your dhow aren't exactly trained, but they're cooperative. They step when guided, lie still during sails, and avoid knocking over the spice jars most of the time. You crouch by a younger sailor who's tying a tiny piece of dried star anise to a baby goat's tail. That for good weather. You ask? He snorts. That's for better goat breath. He's not joking. As he works, he explains that his father taught him to always tie something fragrant to the tail of the smallest goat. It helps when storms get close. The boat smells better when everyone panics. You're not sure if that's a joke either. You're beginning to realize there's a rhythm to all of this, a slow, sea-born logic where rituals don't need to make scientific sense as long as they feel true. Tie charm. Milk goat. Feed goat. Whisper to goat. Repeat. Historians still argue whether goats were included in oceanic trade out of pure necessity, spiritual tradition, or because they were simply easier than camels. The most likely truth is a bit of all three. What other animal can survive a sea voyage? Keep giving milk, stay chill during a storm, and possibly predict it too. One sailor tells you his mother used to say goats could hear the sky. Another insists their tails twitch differently when a rival boat is nearby. Still, another claims the goats prefer certain chants, especially when sung off-key. You try one. The goat next to you blinks slowly and proceeds to sneeze directly in your face. Spiritual. Maybe rude. Definitely. By mid-afternoon, the dhow glides in open water. The sky looks stretched thin. A sheet of silver blue pulled tight above you. The goats stir, restless. One tries to climb at the pile of bundled linen. Another chews on the edge of a sailor's sandal, which he accepts as casually as if it were a light breeze. You find yourself watching them, noticing their charms now, not just as trinkets, but as tiny biographies. One goat's tail has 2 cowrie shells and a brass pin shaped like a fish. Another has a thread so faded it looks like sea mist. Each one means something. Each one carries part of the story of this boat, of this crew, of this sea. A gust of wind shifts the sails. The dhow creaks. The goats all look up at the same time. It's subtle, quick, but unmistakable. A pause. Then they go back to their business as if nothing happened. You glance at the sailor beside you. He's already standing, watching the horizon. Storm. You ask? Maybe, he says. Maybe just a memory. And with that, he kneels to tighten the charm on the goat's tail nearest him, just in case. The wind thickens by late afternoon, not in speed, but in texture, like someone slathered the sky in wet linen. You lean on the dhow's side rail, watching waves slap against the hull like an impatient cook testing dough. And the goats, they're grumbling. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a kind of low, communal mutter that suggests they know something you don't. One goat lets out a long sigh, tail twitching twice. That's either an omen or indigestion. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Somali sailors were among the most adept navigators of the medieval Indian Ocean world. Long before modern charts, they read the sea through monsoon cycles, wave patterns, bird migration, and cloud movements. This deep, generational oceanic literacy let them cross thousands of kilometers between the Horn of Africa and far-flung ports like Calicut, Zanzibar, and Aden. Some oral histories say a single glance at the clouds was enough for a seasoned sailor to know when to turn, when to dock, and when to say a quick prayer. And yes, they brought goats for the whole journey. But here's your quirky tidbit. It wasn't unheard of for Somali sailors to take their goats up to the bow during changing tides and ask them which way the wind was going to turn. Ask may be generous more often. They'd stare at the goats, wait for a sneeze or tail flick, and interpret the result like woolly fortune cookies. You spot one of the older goats, Seagull, again being led forward. The crew parts for her like she's a queen. A sailor with one arm and a very specific tattoo kneels beside her and carefully untangles a small bell from her tail charm. It jingles once. Seagull stares at him. The sailor nods. The sea is thinking. He says to no one in particular. Everyone seems to know what that means. You don't. You just sit on a coil of rope and try to look like you do. Historians still argue whether these goat behaviors were seen as spiritual signals, practical hunches, or just comforting habits on long voyages. Some argue that the goats' reactions reflected subtle environmental cues: air pressure, wave angle, barometric shifts, that the sailors learned to associate with weather changes. Others argue that people will find meaning in anything if they stare at it long enough. See, every tea leaf reader, ever. Still, you can't deny the silence that falls over the crew when one of the goats lets out a snort, followed by a shuffle to the left. One sailor mutters something under his breath and begins coiling ropes with renewed urgency. The dhow slows slightly, sails shifting like indecisive curtains. There's no storm yet, but something is stirring. A change. The kind you feel in your teeth before it reaches your skin. The goats begin to shuffle, nothing dramatic, just small steps. Closer together, and every charm on every tail begins to swing in an oddly synchronized rhythm. Left, right, left. Then, they stop. Stillness. Not silence because the ocean never shuts up, but a kind of unified breath holding from everyone and everything on board. You glance up. The clouds above seem to lean in, but nothing happens. Not yet. And just like that, the goats go back to chewing. The sailors exhale, one after another, like a wind rolling down the boat. Some chuckle. One pats the goat beside him. Another unties a tail charm, replaces it with a sprig of sea rosemary, and nods in satisfaction like a man who just solved a crossword. You sit back, dizzy from the sheer poetry of it all. Somewhere below deck, a kettle whistles softly. The sky lightens a little, the goats shift, lie back down, and you still barefoot, still slightly seasick, and now completely convinced that goats are better sailors than you find yourself smiling. Because apparently, on this dhow, weather prediction has a tail. The wind evens out as the day leans into evening, the sky softening into gentle gold. You're wedged comfortably between a burlap sack of dried lentils and a goat named Barrow, who insists on chewing your sleeve every few minutes. The sailors lounge like tired cats, one gently plucking a string instrument made from a gourd and twine. A woman, possibly the captain's sister, possibly someone who just decided to show up, is tying something to a new goat's tail. You squint. It looks like a fish vertebra, maybe, or possibly a carved date pit. It dangles from braided thread like a forgotten charm bracelet. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many Somali dhows weren't just floating freight carriers. They were homes. Family crews sailed together for months, sometimes entire seasons, bringing textiles, spices, and livestock along the Swahili coast and the Red Sea. Domestic life mingled with commerce. You'd find woven mats, hearth pots balanced over small stoves, and yes, goats with sleeping privileges. The sea wasn't just a route. It was a neighborhood, and because of that, tail charms weren't a gimmick. They were personal. You wander closer. Curious, the woman notices your interest and holds up the charm with a smile. Akun la'an wa iftiin la'an. She says, without knowledge, there is no light. You nod. Like you understand. You sort of do, maybe. She lets you touch the charm. It's warm from her fingers and ties it gently to the tail of a shaggy, indifferent billy goat with one crooked horn. That one's for clarity, she adds, for seeing things you normally miss. You watch as the goat flicks its tail and trots off, trailing its charm like a bookmark in a very weird story. Here's your quirky tidbit. Somali sailors sometimes believed tail charms could help their goats dream more peacefully during voyages. Some even whispered the charm's name, yes. The charm had a name into the goat's ear at night, like a lullaby or a password. If the goat slept without snoring, that meant the charm was working. And if it snored, well, the woman says with a grin, then you made a bad charm. The goats snooze as the dhow rocks softly. One of them kicks in its sleep, dream galloping across some imaginary savanna. Another starts making a purring noise that is unsettlingly close to a kazoo. Historians still argue whether the charm rituals began as spiritual practices or practical markers. Some think they were initially used to identify goats during chaotic dockside trades, before evolving into symbolic talismans. Others think the sailors simply enjoyed creating meaning in an unpredictable world. Because let's be honest, when you're drifting on a vast, opinionated ocean with nothing but wind and sailcloth between you, and a very wet, very inconvenient death, tying a wish to a goat's tail might be the only form of control you've got. The dhow shifts. A gull screams from above. The goats twitch their ears in near unison. You start to notice patterns now. Certain charms make certain sounds, clicks, clinks, rustles. and each sailor seems to know exactly who tied what to which goat. It's a language, a quiet, swinging, tail-bound dialect, and it speaks volumes. Someone lights a lantern. The warm glow spreads across the deck like melted honey. A sailor calls out a story from the stern, launching into an elaborate tale involving a goat, a sea spirit, and a very misunderstood mango. It's only slightly ridiculous, but everyone listens, because on a dhow at twilight, everything sounds a little magical. Even a goat with a fishbone tied to its tail. Night descends like it's been waiting all day for its turn. The ocean turns thick and glossy, the kind of black that seems to swallow light whole. Lanterns sway from this mast and rigging, casting golden halos that barely stretch beyond the deck. The stars arrive like they're on cue, spilling overhead in clusters and constellations too numerous to name, but somehow familiar, like freckles on the sky's face. You lie on a woven mat beside Barrow the goat, who now seems to accept you as part of his herd. He sighs, shifts his hooves, and rests his chin near your knee. Out on the open sea, the night hums with a particular stillness. Not silence, but a blend of goat snores, sailcloth flutter, creaking wood, and the rhythmic lap of waves. It's a lullaby made of history and salt. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Somali sailors were deeply attuned to the stars. Their navigation systems relied heavily on celestial cues. Orion's belt for direction, the Southern Cross for distance, Venus for timekeeping. They didn't just see stars, they listened to them. The knowledge was oral, passed from captain to apprentice over decades, and combined with wind, tide, and even smell to guide their voyages. No GPS, no compass, just memory and starlight. Tonight, that tradition continues. One of the elder sailors, wrapped in a long indigo shawl, sits near the stern and begins to point out constellations. Not with fingers, but with the tip of a carved stick, which he lifts gently toward the sky like he's conducting a silent orchestra. That one there, he murmurs, is the goat's friend. He tells the sky which way the wind will blow. You peer upward. He's gesturing to a constellation you can't quite recognize, but it seems to flicker extra bright when he names it. And here's your quirky tidbit. Sailors often gave names to stars that aren't on any official charts, like Goat's Breath, Old Woman's Elbow, and one especially popular star cluster called the Tail of the World, which, according to local lore, wiggles just like a goat's charm in wind. Supposedly, if it twinkles fast enough, it means you'll get home sooner than expected, or that the fish will bite, or that someone on board is secretly in love. Depends who you ask. You glance over at the goats. Their charms dangle gently from their tails, catching bits of starlight like tiny pendulums of prophecy. Some sway to the motion of the dhow. Others stay still, as if even gravity respects sleep. Historians still argue whether Somali astronomical lore was influenced more by pre-Islamic animism or the later Islamic astronomical traditions from Arabia, likely both. Star knowledge was layered, blending faith, folklore, observation, and goat-related superstition into a system that worked. Even now, with steel ships and radar, many coastal sailors still say you should never leave port without first consulting the goat sky. The elder sailor points to another cluster. That one tells you when the moon is lying. You blink. The moon lies. He nods gravely. Oh yes, especially on Thursdays. Naturally, more sailors gather near him, sitting in a wide semicircle like school children at an open-air lecture. Even the goats perk up. One bleats softly. The elder turns, looks at the goat, and says, "That one's been listening the whole time." Nobody laughs. Not mockingly, because in this moment, you believe it too. The goats are watching the stars, and maybe they've always been watching. Maybe part of why the charms exist is to honor that quiet wisdom, the way goats seem so content in the dark, so unfazed by the endlessness of the sea. Maybe the sailors tie bits of their hopes to those twitching tails, because they've seen too much to trust the sea completely, and not enough to walk away from it. So they trust the goats. You lie back, arms crossed behind your head, listening to the muttered names of invisible stars, the soft shuffle of hooves, the tiny clicks of tail charms against wood. Barrow shifts beside you, His tail charm glints like a falling star caught halfway through a wish. And above, the sky stretches on and on and on. You wake not with a start, but with that strange, seaborne sense of time having passed without your permission. The world is still swaying, still whispering, still cradling the dhow like it's some blessed cradle. Morning hasn't arrived yet, but the sky is starting to think about it. The goats are restless. They shuffle around in slow circles, clinking their charms like they're rehearsing for a bell choir. No one invited them to join. Seagull, queen of the goat court, stares into the east with unsettling intensity, her tail twitching with the kind of slow certainty that suggests she's absolutely judging the horizon. You sit up groggily, brushing a goat hair off your cheek, and take in the deck. Some sailors are already awake, stretching, squatting, murmuring short prayers. One is stirring something in a blackened pot that smells like boiled ginger and sleepy regret. And right in the middle of it all, a new goat, a small one, wide-eyed, wearing no tail charm yet. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Young goats born during voyages were considered omens, though their interpretation varied wildly. Some sailors believed these sea-born kids were lucky, that they heralded smooth currents and profitable trades. Others found them unsettling, unsure what to make of a creature who'd never felt solid ground. It's said some captains refused to dock at certain ports if a goat was born en route. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some dhow communities, it was tradition to let the youngest sailor choose the charm for the youngest goat, usually something ridiculous like a corn husk, or a piece of chewed clove, or a bead made from a broken sandal buckle. But once chosen, it stayed on for the goat's entire life, like a weird, jangly birth certificate. Today, it's your turn. The crew, bleary-eyed but curious, surrounds you with quiet anticipation. Someone presses a small leather pouch into your hands. Inside, odds and ends collected from the boat, a copper ring, a bit of dried lavender, a piece of green glass, a chicken feather, a carved wooden button. You crouch by the baby goat, who blinks at you with deep, ancient suspicion. You hold up the items one by one. No reaction until you get to the lavender. The goat tilts its head, sniffs, then sneezes. Everyone nods approvingly. Historians still argue whether the practice of assigning goat charms was purely symbolic or if sailors truly believed the objects carried protective energy. Some posit the choices were meant to train younger crew members in observational thinking and emotional awareness like ancient, high-stakes preschool crafts. Others believe sailors just liked watching goats sneeze. You thread the dried lavender onto a bit of frayed red thread, tying it into a simple loop. And then, with hands steadier than you expect, you knot it gently onto the baby goat's tail. A moment of silence. Then the baby goat turns, walks in a perfect circle, and lies down beside Barrow, who grunts once and allows it. The spell is sealed. A few sailors nod, muttering phrases like good choice or lavender dreams. One claps you softly on the shoulder. Your goat now, he says. Name it before the sun. You panic. Biscuit. A pause. Then laughter. Biscuit, one of them calls out toward the sails. You hear that? Seagull, you've got a biscuit in your court now. Seagull, imperious as ever, barely reacts, but her charm swings once. You take that as approval. The sky continues to pale. The sea carries the dhow forward like it's dreaming. And you new goat parent, honorary charm chooser, accidental deck sleeper, settle back onto your mat with biscuit curled beside you. The baby goat snores like a deflating balloon. It's perfect. The sun stretches itself across the sea like it's late to the party, pouring syrupy gold over the waves and turning the dhow's deck into a warm, glowing floorboard stage. You wake to the sound of hooves, specifically Biscuit's hooves, as the baby goat attempts to climb your shins with all the grace of a very soft, clumsy avalanche. Barrow gives you a look that says, you started this. Morning on the dhow smells like boiled tea leaves, roasted lentils, brine-soaked ropes, and goat fur. Sailors begin moving with the familiar rhythm of people who have lived on boats long enough to fold themselves into the wood grain. Breakfast is unceremonious flatbread, Dates, a sort of sweet, salty cheese that probably comes from someone on board and everyone eats quietly while watching the goats. Always the goats. Here's your mainstream historical fact. On long voyages, goats weren't just milked for sustenance, their behavior was observed almost religiously. If the goats refused food, sailors read it as a sign to turn back. If they clumped together unusually, it was interpreted as a warning of ill omens. A single goat refusing to move from a corner of the deck. You might as well postpone docking for a day or two. Goats, in other words, were the mood ring of the maritime world. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some crews went so far as to ask the goats for permission before weighing anchor. Not in words. Obviously, though one sailor claims his grandfather used to sing to the herd and wait for a yes bleat. If the goats remained quiet, he'd cancel the trip. If one responded, they'd go, and if all of them responded, he'd bring extra snacks. Because the goats knew when the sea was going to be greedy. You bite into a slice of hard cheese that tastes like salty mystery. Watching the crew get the sails adjusted, Seagull stretches in the sunlight, and her charm, a tiny bone tied with gold thread, glistens like royalty. Historians still argue whether the elevated status of goats aboard Somali vessels was unique to the region or part of a larger Indian Ocean herding sailor culture. Some scholars compare it to similar traditions in southern Arabia or even coastal India. Others argue it was simply a practical fusion. In places where camels couldn't sail and chickens couldn't stay awake during storms, goats filled the emotional and logistical gap. Biscuit attempts to chew on your sandal strap again. You gently nudge him away. He returns twice, more determined. You surrender the sandal. He's earned it. The dhow leans slightly into the current as a distant coastline appears on the horizon. Dusty hills, faint palm groves, and the slow shimmer of heat that makes it all look like it's painted on glass. The crew murmurs in a dialect you're just beginning to parse. Names of ports, maybe, or warnings about taxes. One sailor adjusts a large brass earring. Another rubs a bit of salt into a scrape on his wrist. Someone hums. The goats shift as one. Their tails flick. Every charm on every tail jingles once, not in unison, but in sequence like a wave of bells crawling across the deck. It's hypnotic. One sailor notices you staring and chuckles. They do that when they smell land or dinner. Hard to say. You nod solemnly, as if this makes perfect sense. And honestly, it kind of does. After all, these goats have become your onboard oracles. They've predicted wind, storms, gossip, and now possibly lunch. And maybe, just maybe, they know something about what's waiting on shore. The sails snap once, catching a fresh gust. The dhow straightens. The crew gets to work tightening ropes and preparing the deck. And the goats wait, because they've done this before. You rest a hand on Biscuit's charm. It's still there. Lavender and thread and all the hope you didn't know you needed to tie into it. Somewhere below deck, a kettle whistles, and above, the sun climbs higher, casting long shadows that make every goat look just a little more heroic. By midday, the heat has gone from gentle warmth to your eyebrows are considering mutiny. You fan yourself with a piece of folded sailcloth and watch as the goats huddle under an improvised shade structure, basically a tattered rug tied between two crates. Even Seagull, high priestess of tale prophecy, has plopped herself down with an unflattering grunt, her charm thudding softly against the wood as she flops onto her side. Biscuit, however, remains determined to eat someone's hat, possibly yours. The coastline is closer. Now clearly defined hills, dusty outcroppings, a few spindly trees that look like someone sketched them in with half a pencil. A port town materializes, slowly, like it's trying to sneak up on you. Sailboats, small markets, people on the shore waving lazily like they know how hot it is out here and they're too polite to say anything. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Somali ports were hubs of Afro-Arabic trade for centuries, especially during the medieval and early modern periods. Towns like Zila and Berbera became essential stops on the Red Sea route, with links to Yemen, Persia, India, and beyond. Goods like myrrh, frankincense, ivory, And woven textiles changed hands in bustling markets, shaded by cloth canopies and full of hawkers shouting prices over braying livestock. And yes, goats were part of the deal. But here's your quirky tidbit. Sailors often brought their goats ashore, not just for trade or milking, but to influence bargaining. Supposedly, the presence of a well-groomed goat with a freshly cleaned tail charm made you seem more reputable. Some sellers believed goats could sniff out liars. Others claimed a goat that refused to enter a shop was signaling that the merchant inside was cheating someone. Naturally, shopkeepers hated this. Biscuit tries to jump into a basket of dates. A sailor scoops him up like a toddler and ties him gently to a coil of rope. You half expect Biscuit to start negotiating for better accommodations. The crew prepares for docking. Ropes get coiled tighter. Sails begin their practiced descent. The goats line up, no kidding, near the front of the deck. Tails swaying, charms polished and ready, like they're about to attend a job interview. Historians still argue whether the practice of reading goat behavior at ports was rooted in superstition or became a kind of social theater. Some believe the sailors leaned into the myth deliberately, training their goats to behave a certain way in public to manipulate trade negotiations. Others argue the goats were genuinely seen as spiritual intermediaries, beings with one hoof in the material world and one in the unseen. Whatever the truth, it's clear everyone on this boat takes the ritual seriously. Even the goats. You help untangle a charm from Barrow's tail. It's wrapped around his neighbor's hoof, which has caused a minor diplomatic incident. And notice something curious. A new trinket, a small seashell, freshly tied in. You're pretty sure it wasn't there yesterday. When you point it out to a passing sailor, he just shrugs. Maybe the goat added it. He says, "You blink, added it." He nods, entirely serious. They know how to ask for what they need. Barrow sneezes once. You have no comeback for that. As the dhow glides into harbor, the noise rises, calls from the dock, clangs from distant market stalls, the flurry of seagulls with the worst timing imaginable. The crew lowers a gangplank. One by one, the goats descend with the solemn dignity of fuzzy diplomats. Each charm sways with purpose. The sailors follow behind, adjusting turbans, straightening belts, brushing off dust like it matters. And then it's your turn. Biscuit bounds down the gangplank, tail charm bobbing like a festive exclamation point. He stops in the middle, turns, and bleats at you like, "What? You need an invitation." So you follow. The port greets you with sun, dust, the scent of cumin and charcoal, and the overwhelming sense that today might be dictated not by what you want to buy, but by what your goat decides to tolerate. The market unfolds in slow, deliberate chaos. Dusty paths crisscrossed by shaded awnings, voices bartering in every register, the clink of scales and the slap of sandals against dry earth. Spices perfume the air, cumin, cardamom, fenugreek, and underneath it all, goats. Always goats. You trail behind Biscuit, who seems oddly confident in this unfamiliar territory. He navigates between woven baskets of lentils, ducks beneath dangling dates, and pauses only once to examine a hanging curtain of dried squid that someone, somewhere, thought was a good decorating choice. People part for him, not out of fear, but recognition. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Somali maritime traders weren't isolated sailors. They were cultural diplomats. In port cities along the Indian Ocean trade routes, they brought with them language, stories, and spiritual practices. Some markets even adjusted their layout when Somali dhows arrived, setting up extra pens for goats, platforms for impromptu poetry recitations, and of course, stall space for charm sellers. Goat tail ornaments were an actual microeconomy. You pass one such stall now. A faded cloth canopy flutters above a wooden table strewn with objects. Glass beads, carved coral, bits of ivory, copper loops, dyed leather knots. The merchant, a wiry man with a grin like a fox caught mid-scheme, gestures to Biscuit approvingly. "Nice tail," he says. "Thanks," you reply, because what else do you say? He lifts a tiny silver bell. "This one makes goats dream of mangoes." "Why would I want that?" He shrugs. "Maybe the goat likes mangoes." And here's your quirky tidbit. Some sailors did believe goats had taste in dreams. Bells, feathers, and herb-stuffed pouches were chosen not just for luck but for content. Lavender for peaceful sleep, rose hips for ambition, blackened pearl for protection against nightmares involving sea monsters, or worse, disappointing cheese. You pick up a sun-bleached bone bead. Biscuit sniffs it and sneezes so hard he knocks over a string of cowrie shells. The merchant nods solemnly. That one's a no. Historians still argue whether these charm stalls were sacred, purely commercial, or something in between. Some accounts suggest the merchants doubled as mystics, reading the goat's tail movement the way others read tea leaves. Others argue it was more like snake oil stories, spun to dazzle sleepy sailors and tourists with coin to spare. Either way, the tradition endured. Even long after goat-tail charms fell out of fashion elsewhere, you settle on a small disc carved from olive wood, engraved with a swirl that looks vaguely like a wave, or maybe a sleeping goat. You don't ask what it's for. You just hand over a few battered coins and attach it to Biscuit's tail. Alongside the lavender bundle, he twitches, gives you a side eye, and continues his regal march through the market. Further in, you find a trader selling sun-bleached parchments covered in maps. One sailor is arguing that a line drawn too close to the coast actually means there's a secret cove. Another insists that the map is upside down, as is the argument, and possibly the entire boat he sailed in on. Biscuit steps directly onto the map and sneezes. I told you. One shouts, even the goat knows. A local woman with a basket of yams chuckles, tosses Biscuit a withered leaf, and then shoos you both away before someone sells her stall out from under her. You stop at a well. It's old, carved from stone, worn smooth by centuries of curious hands and parched throats. Biscuit drinks politely. You lean back, letting the cool shade gather on your face. And in the distance, the call of a flute. You follow it. The source, a circle of musicians, playing beneath a fig tree near the edge of the market. One holds a drum, another a wind instrument fashioned from reed. A few sailors from your dhow are already there, tapping rhythms against their legs, humming along. One of them notices Biscuit and grins. He come to dance. You shrug. Probably just here for the snacks. And as if on cue, someone tosses down a handful of sesame seeds. Biscuit munches them with the slow, smug contentment of a goat who knows he's the main character. You lean against the tree, the music wrapping around you like warm cloths. Your goat settled at your feet, tail charm jingling softly in time with the rhythm. You've bartered, blessed, wandered, and watched. And somehow, even in a strange city, you don't feel lost. Because you've got your goat, and your goat has mango dreams. By late afternoon, the market begins to wind down. Not that it ever really stops, but the energy shifts. The voices soften. Merchants recline in the shade behind half-sold baskets. Sailors return to their ships with arms full of spices, fabrics, and mysterious parcels that may or may not be tax-compliant. The goats, now thoroughly unimpressed with humanity, begin herding themselves back toward the dock. You and Biscuit linger beneath a jacaranda tree, its violet blossoms littering the dusty street like someone tried to carpet the path with soft purple sighs. He naps beside you, twitching slightly in his sleep, probably dreaming of chasing mangoes or becoming the spiritual leader of goat kind. Either is possible at this point. A sailor squats next to you. He's older, face lined by both time and salt, and his beard is braided with small charms. A habit you're now realizing didn't start with goats. Your little one, he says, tapping Biscuit's hoof gently. He chose you. You raise an eyebrow. I was told I chose him. The man chuckles. That's what they let you think. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In many nomadic and maritime traditions, including those of the Somali coast, animals weren't merely passive property. They were regarded as kinship spirits. Sailors bonded deeply with their livestock, sometimes assigning them names from family lines, marking them with family sigils, even composing short lullabies for their comfort during storms. A goat was more than a source of milk. It was a living charm, a spiritual stabilizer in an unstable world. And your quirky tidbit of the day. Some sailors reportedly whispered their deepest secrets to a single goat, believing the animal would carry those confessions safely across the sea. It was like emotional journaling, but fuzzier and more judgmental. There's even one record of a captain who swore that his goat's behavior would change after each of these whispering nights, as if it understood the weight of what it was now carrying. You glance at Biscuit, he yawns without apology and flips onto his other side, tail charm catching the light like a wink from the divine. Historians still argue whether this intense emotional connection to livestock was a form of superstition, emotional compensation, or a culturally encoded survival mechanism. Some argue it was simply a byproduct of isolation when the only steady presence aboard was a goat. Of course, it became your confidant. Others claim these connections reflected a deeper worldview, one in which all beings, human or goat, were considered co-navigators of fate. The sailor leans closer. You know, there's a story, he says, about a goat who refused to board a dhow one morning. Crew tried everything, bribes, tricks, even tried carrying it. Wouldn't budge. Kicked the captain in the knee. You blink, and they left without it. Ship hit a sandbank a mile out, cracked the hull like an egg. Seriously. He nods. Ever since, that family ties an extra charm onto the tail of every goat. One for warning, one for watching. You look at Biscuit's tail, the lavender bundle, the olive wood disc. The thread is fraying just slightly at the knot. I should retie that. You murmur. The sailor shrugs. Maybe, or maybe it knows when to fall off. He stands, pats his knee, and ambles off toward the shore, leaving you with a nap-happy goat and more questions than answers. The sun tips lower, stretching your shadows across the sand. You and Biscuit begin the slow walk back toward the dhow. Along the way, children laugh and point. Look at that one. He's got earrings, and merchants wave lazily from stalls now occupied by sleepy cats and half-hearted flies. At the dock, the crew is loading goods. One crate smells aggressively of cinnamon. Another appears to be sweating oil. The goats are already boarding, their charms making a faint symphony of metallic whispers. Biscuit trots up the gangplank with a confidence that suggests he owns the boat. You follow, ducking beneath a sail rope, and land back on deck with the strange comfort of returning to a floating home. Someone hands you a mug of warm spiced tea. You sip it slowly, watching the coast begin to retreat as the dhow drifts from the harbor once more. The horizon opens its arms. Biscuit lies beside you, tail charm tapping gently against your boot. Whatever comes next storms. Silence. Sunburn. It'll be you. This boat, and a goat who might just know more than anyone else on board. The dhow creaks and sighs as it moves back into the open water, like it's reluctantly accepting its fate after a short, sun-soaked vacation. The wind picks up just enough to ruffle your hair and set every tail charm gently swaying again, as if the goats are tuning their personal wind chimes to the key of "We're back at sea." Biscuit has claimed a spot between two sacks of lentils and appears to be meditating or napping. It's sometimes hard to tell with goats. You stretch out beside him, your back against a coil of rope, your knees just barely brushing the edge of a water barrel. There's a lull now, that familiar drifting silence that only happens in the middle of nowhere, somewhere between we left and will arrive. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Somali sailors navigated by stars with extraordinary precision. Long before GPS or even compasses were widely used, they mapped constellations like Orion, Canopus, and the Southern Cross. These weren't just pretty lights to them. They were clocks, calendars, and road signs stitched into the sky. Training a navigator could take years, and even then, the best sailors often deferred to elders or surprise goat behavior during murky weather. Which brings us to your quirky tidbit. During certain months, sailors would actually point the goats' tails toward the stars before setting sail, claiming it would lock in a direction. It wasn't uncommon to see a sailor gently holding a goat aloft, aligning its tail with the horizon like it was a woolly sextant. And yes, some believed the tail charm made of meteorite stone would help attract luck from above. You glance over at Biscuit's current adornments. Wood, thread, lavender, nothing interstellar. He doesn't seem concerned. Then again, you're pretty sure if the moon fell into the sea right now, Biscuit would yawn. blink once, and go back to dreaming about sesame snacks. Historians still argue whether these celestial rituals were symbolic, scientific, or just an elaborate excuse to wave goats around dramatically in moonlight. Some claim they stem from ancient Sabaean star cults, funneled through maritime trade into Somali customs. Others argue it was due to folklore dressed up in astronomy's hand-me-downs cultural theater performed beneath the same stars that guided real-world decisions. The sea grows quiet, flatter than it has been all day. The dhow glides so smoothly you feel more like you're floating through honey than water. Up above, the first stars begin to blink awake, one by one, in that patient, unhurried way only the sky understands. A sailor near the bow hums softly, an old melody, probably learned from a grandfather or great-uncle. The words are about a fish who fell in love with the moon. You're only half listening until someone picks up a drum and joins in, tapping a slow heartbeat rhythm that seems to echo all the way down to your toes. Biscuit lifts his head, ears flicking. You swear he nods once in time with the beat. You start to hum along, quietly, not to join them, exactly more to wrap yourself in the feeling of it. This is what peace looks like. Soft waves, stars overhead, a faint smell of salt and sesame, and a goat pressed against your leg like a sleepy heating pad with hooves. You remember something the old sailor said about goats choosing their people. You look at Biscuit. He sneezes in your general direction, then curls back up. Yeah, you're definitely chosen. The boat rocks gently. More stars spill across the sky, scattering in wide arcs, tangled lines. Imaginary figures. You trace the ones you know. Orion's belt, the Pleiades cluster, a crooked smile of stars that someone once told you was a lion, but always looked more like a chicken nugget. A sailor points toward the eastern sky and murmurs something about the goat star. You think he's joking, until you realize he's pointing to Capella, whose name literally comes from Latin for little she-goat. Of course, there's a goat star. You glance at Biscuit again. This time, you nod first. Somewhere behind you, someone starts boiling water for tea. The smell of clove drifts by. A goat bleats in its sleep. A crewman yawns so hard he nearly tips backward off a crate. And just like that, the dhow is wrapped in quiet again. Stars above, sea below, charm on tail, and a rhythm older than maps pulling you onward. The night deepens around you like ink poured over glass, slow, steady, and absolute. The sky is packed with the stars now, more than you can count, more than you can name. Like someone spilled the universe across a velvet tablecloth and forgot to clean it up. Every now and then, one streaks across the dark, and the crew murmurs wishes into the wind. You whisper 1, 2, but only Biscuit hears it, and he's not telling. You shift under your blanket, which smells faintly of sheep and cloves. It's not comfortable in the usual sense. But out here, floating between destinations, comfort is less about plush cushions and more about feeling like nothing urgent exists, except maybe refilling the water jug or preventing Biscuit from eating rope again. The crew takes turns with night watch, but no one's terribly worried. The stars are clear, the wind is soft, and Biscuit hasn't launched any surprise bleeding fits, which many now consider a form of weather prediction. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Somali sailors often worked by a rotating shift system that balanced rest, duty, and ritual. Night watches weren't just for navigation, they were also spiritual windows. Some would recite poetry to the stars. Others would hum lullabies learned from their mothers. It was a sacred quiet, the kind of silence that only exists when the world agrees to hush for a few hours. And your quirky tidbit tonight. Some dhows had designated dream anchors, stones, or objects placed under the captain's bed or nearest blanket pile, believed to tether dreams safely. Without one, they said your soul might drift out to sea and forget the way back. One famous sailor insisted on sleeping with a goat bell tied to his toe, just in case. It jingled whenever he had nightmares. You think about that for a while. Biscuit's bell, a small, faint one tied near his ankle, taps against the deck in rhythm with the boat's slow rock. Maybe he's anchoring your dreams now. Maybe he's the captain, and you're just a sidekick with opposable thumbs. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were spiritual safeguards or convenient bedtime excuses. Some say the stones were pieces of ancestors' graves, carried as talismans. Others think they were just regular rocks dressed up with legend because sailors liked having something anything to believe in while bobbing on a giant soup bowl of salt and mystery. Above you, Capella, the goat star, sits bright and steady near the zenith. Biscuit flicks an ear as if to say, "That one's mine." You lie back, arms folded beneath your head, and let your thoughts drift. What would it feel like to navigate by goat? To sail not by maps or stars, but by the instincts of a small, stubby-legged creature whose priorities are snacks, naps, and possibly universal truth. You smile at the idea. Then, somewhere in the quiet, a soft sound, a snore. Not from a person, not from Biscuit, who currently looks like he's solving a philosophical equation in his sleep. No, this is coming from another goat. Turns out, one of the newer ones snores like a tiny accordion full of regret. The sound cuts through the stillness like a badly timed kazoo solo, rising and falling with every wave. You stifle a laugh. One of the sailors does not. "Someone needs to charm that goat into silence," he mumbles, dragging his blanket over his ears. You consider offering him a lavender pouch, but instead, you roll over and let the snores blend into the rhythm of the sea. It's weirdly soothing, like the ocean is dreaming through a goat. The stars pulse overhead. Your breath slows, and you wonder, just before sleep finds you, whether Biscuit is dreaming of stars too. Morning comes in shyly. No grand entrance, just a quiet softening of the dark, the kind of slow transition that makes you question whether it's really happening until suddenly, everything is tinted with that strange pre-sunlight color, like the world has been dipped in cold tea. The crew begins to stir, stretching limbs and scratching beards. The goats are up before the humans. Of course, Biscuit has already headbutted a sack of grain in what you assume is either protest or breakfast preparation. You rub your eyes and sit up. The wind has shifted. The dhow cuts smoothly through the water now, gliding like it remembers its purpose. Off to the west, the horizon looks hazy, the line between sea and sky barely more than a suggestion. One of the sailors nods toward it. "Storm last week," he says, "but it's gone now. Ghost wind." "Maybe." You nod back as if you know what that means. Biscuit does not look convinced. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Somali sailors were adept at interpreting wind shifts through smell and sound. The early morning air carried hints salinity, dampness, even hints of algae or dust that told them what waters lay ahead. They used long strands of camel hair tied to poles to test air movement. And yes, sometimes they used goat behavior as a secondary metric. And for your quirky tidbit, some dhows kept wind goats. Specific goats believed to have sensitive hooves that could detect distant storms. It's said that if a wind goat started dancing in place, turning in circles, or trying to climb the mast, which sounds fake, but is alarmingly real, it meant bad weather was a day or two away. You glance at Biscuit. He's chewing on a corner of the sail. No storm today. Historians still argue whether the wind goat stories were grounded in real animal behavior or pure superstition. Some sailors claimed goats reacted to changes in barometric pressure before storms, while others believed it was all part of a psychological feedback loop. If you believed the goat knew something, you adjusted your sailing subconsciously. The goat just kept being a goat. You eat a simple breakfast, flatbread, honey, a handful of salty nuts handed down by a sailor who clearly doesn't know or care what they actually are. Biscuit gets his own treat, a wilted mango skin saved just for him. He devours it like royalty being served on fine china. The coastline becomes visible around midday, a thin brown smudge that thickens into dunes, cliffs, and distant movement. A small harbor village, smoke curling upward. The occasional flash of a glinting pot or a person waving from the shallows. You recognize the look of a place not marked on most maps. The kind of village only remembered by goats, old men, and the wind. The dhow pulls in slowly, careful of hidden rocks. A few villagers run forward with ropes, securing the vessel with practiced ease. No shouting, just nods. Familiarity. You disembark with Biscuit at your side. No cargo to unload this time, just stories and sore feet. The air smells like cumin and fish. You wrinkle your nose. Biscuit seems delighted. The village goats come to investigate the newcomer. Biscuit holds his own. A few sniffs, a head nod, one brief headbutt that you assume is a greeting. Then he struts off toward a shade tree like he owns the place. You follow, because of course you do. Under the tree, you meet an old woman weaving rope. She squints at you, then at Biscuit. "Charm's crooked," she says, pointing at his tail. You crouch down. Sure enough, the olive wood disc has slipped sideways, now dangling like a tired earring. She pulls a new string from her pouch, ties it with fingers that seem slow but don't miss a beat. The charm sits centered again, tail lifted with pride. "Better," she mutters, more to the tree than to you. You sit quietly as she resumes weaving. Here, silence isn't awkward. It's currency. You offer it back with interest. "Eventually," she says, "that goat. You named him." You nod. "Biscuit." She smiles faintly. "He chose that." And just like that, she goes back to weaving. You lean back, listening to the breeze thread itself through palm leaves. Not every harbor is for trading. Some are for resting, remembering, retying charms and untying knots you didn't realize were inside you. Biscuit flops beside you with a heavy sigh. This is what a good pause feels like. The sun dips low again. Its slow descent painting the village in that syrupy gold that makes even goats look majestic. Biscuit, for instance, currently resembles a small deity of naps, posed on a rock with the wind ruffling his fur like a magazine cover shoot. You're not sure if it's the tail charm or the lighting, but you swear he actually glows a little. You sit beside him, feet buried in sand still warm from the day. Behind you, the dhow's sail flaps softly in the breeze, ready but patient. Ahead, the villagers have begun lighting lanterns, small flickers that dot the shoreline like a constellation turned upside down. A young girl approaches, holding something wrapped in cloth. "For your goat," she says, unwrapping a tiny bracelet of shells and dyed string. Biscuit blinks at it, then her. Then you tie it just above his hoof, and he gives a single approving snort before returning to his eternal life mission of doing absolutely nothing. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In many coastal Somali communities, goats played roles in not only seafaring life, but ceremonial practice. Special accessories like hoof wrappings, nose beads, and even horn paint were used during certain moon phases to mark transition events, births, deaths, journeys, and the return of a dhow. While often associated with Islamic customs, many of these rituals had older, pre-Islamic roots threads of belief going back centuries, even millennia. And today's quirky tidbit: there's a tale from one coastal village that swears a goat once led an entire crew home after their navigator fell ill. The crew insisted they let the goat choose the stars each night following its preferred sleep direction, or which side of the boat it lay on. They arrived safely. When asked how it worked, the captain reportedly said, "Goats never argue with the ocean. They just listen better." Historians still argue whether that story has any basis in truth, or if it was the salty exaggeration of an old mariner who didn't want to admit he just guessed well. But more than one academic has noted that the Somali oral tradition often weaves truth with legend. Like threads in a sail, you don't separate them. You catch the wind with both. You and Biscuit watch the stars come out again. First in singles, then in groups, then as a whole glittering ceiling. Capella appears on cue, and you nod to her like an old friend. Biscuit does too, or maybe he's just nodding off. The villagers gather around a fire for tea and quiet song, a place where words are slow and smiles come easy. Someone hands you a bowl of something sweet and warm. And for the first time in days, maybe weeks, you don't immediately wonder what's in it. You just eat. You're tired, but it's the good kind. The kind of tired that comes from learning things without trying. From laughing at things that don't need explaining. From following a goat across sea and sky and sand and ending up somewhere better than you expected. You scratch Biscuit gently behind the ears. His charm glints faintly in the firelight. Whatever comes next, you know you'll be fine. Because this goat chose you, and somewhere between his tail charm, the wind, and the stars, he's keeping you on course. Now, as you close your eyes and let the night fold around you like a sail dropping in perfect silence, let's slow things down even further. The waves now whisper rather than speak. Each crest and trough is like a breath the ocean takes in its sleep. You lie still beneath a sky so filled with stars, it feels like you're floating in space, wrapped not in blankets, But in constellations, there is no hurry now, no ship to load, no market to navigate, no tail charm to straighten. Only this quiet, this motion, this moment. Biscuit is curled close to your side, radiating a calm warmth, like a hearth that needs no fire. His breathing is slow and steady, and it guides yours too. You match him breath for breath, inhale for gentle exhale. You are part of something ancient now, something that moves not with engines or deadlines, but with rhythm, with instinct. Let go of the road behind you. The dust of the market, the scent of clove and fish, the shifting sails. All of it can drift gently out to sea now. There's nothing to chase. Nothing left undone, only sleep ahead, as soft and steady as a goat's heart beating beside yours. The fire in the village dims to embers, the breeze is soft, and the night holds you, not tightly, but kindly. Sleep well, sailor, sleep well, biscuit.